A man accuses another man of a crime.
Well, what do you want? I say he's guilty.
We want to hear your arguments.
I gave you my arguments.
We're not convinced. We want to hear them again.
You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth!
He stands his ground, demands justice, refuses to be silenced. It doesn't matter who he is, rich or poor, noble or nobody. The pursuit of truth makes him a hero. From medieval knights defending their honor to courtroom dramas, the fight for truth has always been one of cinema's favorite stories. But what happens when the accuser is a woman?
There was never a guest staying in here, Miss Blacklock. This cabin was always empty.
Gregory, are you trying to tell me I'm insane?
It's what I'm trying not to tell myself.
Mr. Russell believes that you made a mistake.
You have never met my wife.
She helped me one night. We spent the evening together.
No.
In thrillers, women aren't disbelieved because they are wrong. They're disbelieved because they're women. And cinema keeps telling us this over and over again. On October 10th, Netflix released a new original film, an adaptation of The Woman in Cabin 10, starring Keira Knightley. The premise is familiar. A journalist is invited onto a luxury yacht for an assignment, and one night she witnesses a woman fall overboard. But when she reports it, no one believes her, so she risks her life to prove the truth. I hadn't even heard about the film before its release, but when I opened Letterboxd to check the reviews, the first things I saw were jokes like, "Do you think she knows the woman in the window, or the girl on the train? Or does the woman in cabin 10 know the woman in black or the woman across the street from the woman in the window?" All poking fun at how identical this plotline is to the girl on the train, the woman in the window, and even the parody, the woman in the house across the street from the girl in the window. All of these stories, including the woman in cabin 10, rely on the exact same trope. A woman witnesses a crime, she speaks up, and no one believes her. And that's exactly what I want to talk about in this video. Gaslighting women in cinema and how entire thriller plots are built on doubting a woman's reality. Why does this story keep repeating? How did we go from Gaslight in 1944, when a husband convinces his wife she is losing her mind, to a whole subgenre of thrillers built on the same premise? A woman knows the truth, but the world insists she imagine it. Today we are going to trace the evolution of this trope from classic psychological manipulation to modern gaslighting thrillers, and figure out why cinema is so obsessed with doubting its own heroines.
I'm not crazy. I'm not hallucinating. Do I seem unreasonable? I have evidence.
Hi everyone, my name is Alona Shilova and you're watching Femme Fatale's Heels channel, where we talk about women, film and women in film. Here's a quick spoiler warning, and also if you're gonna see in this video some weird edits or screenshots, just know it's due to copyright issues on YouTube right now. I also have a Patreon where I upload all the videos in the original editing without the YouTube censorship, so I will be very grateful if you support my work there. It will really mean a lot to me. Let's start with the film that gave this entire phenomenon its name, Gaslight from 1944. This is where the term gaslighting originally comes from. The story follows a young wife played by Ingrid Bergman, whose charming and attentive husband slowly convinces her she is going insane, just so he can take her inheritance. He isolates her inside their home, hides objects and then accuses her of misplacing them, makes strange noises in the attic at night, dims the gaslight and then insists nothing has changed. Every time she reacts, he responds calmly with superiority. "You're overreacting, you must be confused, you are not well." And the cruel brilliance of his manipulation is that he never raises his voice. He doesn't need physical violence, he uses reason to erase her reality. To understand why this story resonated so strongly, we have to remember the cultural context of the 1940s. Women at that time were still largely dependent on men, financially, socially, legally. A wife's identity was defined by her marriage, and a husband's betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was existential. If your husband turned against you, you didn't just lose love. You could lose your home, your reputation, your sanity, because society won't take your side. Men of the 19th century were authoritarian and hypocritical, tyrannizing their womenfolk who, in turn, would never raise a voice in their own defense. And the doctors, drunk on their grandiosity, happy to lock away any unorthodox individual in return for a few suffragettes. How do we know all this? Well, Victorian literature is littered with instances of curtailed female freedoms, from poor old Bertha Rochester in the attic at Thornyfant Hall to fairly little Laura Fairley, put into a madhouse in The Woman in White. The list could continue a very, very long way. Right psychologist Sarah Weiss in Gaslight stories driving Ingrid Bergman insane. So Gaslight is not just a thriller, it's a distilled fear of being trapped inside a reality controlled by a man. And yet, even in this supposedly empowering story, Ingrid Bergman's character is still framed as damsel in distress. She does not save herself. Another man steps in to rescue her and becomes more of a protagonist than she is. But even in this early film, one of the essential ideas, or rather fears, was already embedded, and it would continue to appear in similar thrillers. The story shows that a woman's position in society and the power structures around her often work against her, and that betrayal or deception by those closest to her can be far more terrifying than any external monster. And this exact theme would later be explored in Rosemary's Baby, where the horror comes not from a stranger or an obvious villain, but from the intimate circles around the protagonist, her husband, her neighbors, and the very people she trusts. Before we continue, a quick note: I don't intend to promote Roman Polanski's work. His personal actions that I cannot say on YouTube because of censorship are disgusting to me, and I will talk more about these perceptions of creators and their films in a separate video about problematic figures and so-called great cinema, so just please let me know in the comments if you're interested in such video. In Rosemary's Baby, the horror is deeply personal. A pregnant woman at her most vulnerable is systematically deceived and manipulated by those she trusts most, her husband, doctor, and even neighbors. After moving into a charming but eerie New York apartment, Rosemary begins to notice strange occurrences and odd behavior around her. Her husband seems increasingly distant, her neighbors overly attentive, and every concern she voices is dismissed as paranoia or hysteria.
Not setting foot in this apartment ever again. And they're not coming within 50 feet of the baby.
They're old people. They have a bunch of old friends. Dr. Shan happens to play the recorder.
We're not taking any chances with the baby's safety. We're going to sublet and move out.
We are not.
Leaving her isolated and unsure of her own perception. The tension escalates as she discovers that the people closest to her are involved in satanic rituals and plan to use her unborn child for their dark purposes. The terror doesn't come from some external monster alone. It comes from the betrayal within her closest circle. Coercive control and reproductive coercion don't look like what we expect domestic violence to look like. They don't necessarily involve physical battery, trips to the hospital, or calls to the police. Coercive control happens when a partner, usually but not always a man, severely limits his intimate partner, usually but not always a woman, in her basic rights by restricting her access to her friends or family, medical care, money, children, education, information, or reality itself. Reproductive coercion happens when a man restricts a woman's access to birth control, or forces her to engage in intercourse for the express purpose of impregnating her without her consent. It also happens when someone, usually a man, tries to control and determine the outcome of a pregnancy. The ultimate goal of reproductive abuse and coercive control more broadly is to dehumanize, disempower, and control a domestic partner, writes Eleanor Johnson in Rosemary's Baby and Coercive Control. This is psychological horror at its most intimate. The protagonist is trapped not only by supernatural threats, but by the manipulation and gaslighting of those meant to protect her, highlighting how pregnancy amplifies vulnerability and how betrayal can be far scarier than any external threat. By the way, I've talked more about this film in our video about feminist body horrors, especially in the part of pregnancy horrors, so please check that one out too. Before we move on to modern examples, I want to say that in my view, stories about women who speak the truth but are not believed have much deeper roots than cinema. Take for example the Greek myth of Cassandra. Gifted with the power of prophecy, she could foresee the future with perfect accuracy, yet no one ever believed her warnings, leading to disaster for Troy. Her tragedy is not just about being ignored. It's about the frustration and helplessness of knowing the truth while the world turns a blind eye. Another landmark example is Charlotte Perkins Gilman's short story, The Yellow Wallpaper, from 1892. In this semi-autobiographical tale, the protagonist is a woman suffering from postpartum depression. Her husband, ostensibly acting in her best interests, confines her to a room, forbids her from writing or engaging in mental activity, and systematically dismisses her perceptions and fears. She is gaslighted daily, made to question her own mind, and gradually descends into obsession and madness. This story highlights how society, medical authority, and intimate relationships can combine to undermine a woman's reality, especially when she is in a vulnerable maternal state. But we will explore the theme of motherhood in cinema more fully in a separate video, so let me know if you would like to watch that. Also, if you're enjoying this video, please give it a like, leave a comment and subscribe. Our views recently dropped because of YouTube's new policy, so such support will really mean a lot to us. Thank you. Moving on to more contemporary films, we see the gaslighting trope evolved in The Girl on the Train from 2016 and The Woman in the Window 2021. In both stories, the female protagonists are primarily observers, witnessing suspicious events from a distance, but never seeing the full picture. The Girl on the Train follows Rachel, a woman struggling with alcoholism and the trauma of a failed marriage. She rides the train every day, observing a seemingly perfect couple from the window, projecting fantasies onto their lives. One day she believes she witnesses a crime, but her addiction and memory gaps make others doubt her, including the police.
Do you remember seeing this woman? She worked for your ex-husband. She's gone missing.
What do you mean she's missing?
Well, her husband said she never came back home the same night you got off the train in Ardsley-on-Hudson.
Her tragedy lies in the fact that her own perceived unreliability isolates her, and she must piece together the truth while battling her personal demons. The gaslighting here is both internal and external. Rachel is made to doubt herself because of her addictions, and the people around her exploit that doubt. The Woman in the Window centers on Anna, a psychologist confined to her home due to agoraphobia. She observes her neighbors and believes she witnesses a violent crime. Like Rachel, her mental health struggles, including the effects of medication and isolation, make her seem unreliable to those around her. Authorities dismiss her concerns, and she is forced to question whether the danger is real or a product of her imagination.
Hi.
What is this?
Ma'am, you all right?
And why is he here?
Mr. Russell believes that you made a mistake.
You have never met my wife.
She helped me one night. We spent the evening together.
No.
She also lives through a traumatic experience of losing her family, which people around her also use as a reason not to believe her.
I'm not crazy. I'm not hallucinating. Do I seem unreasonable? I have evidence. There was that picture that Jane drew and she signed, and there's a photograph that somebody took of me while I was sleeping. Look, it doesn't matter what you think about me, if you approve of me, if you think that I'm reliable. There is a boy in danger in that house. Just help him, please. You're a father. I would think that you would want to help a child. If my husband were here, he would help. He would believe me.
Dr. Fox, your family is dead.
Her tragedy is compounded by her vulnerability and loneliness, turning her home, normally a place of safety, into a prison where she cannot trust her own senses. So both films employ topics of alcohol, meditation, and fragile mental health as narrative devices to justify others' disbelief, reinforcing the idea that a woman's mind is unreliable. On top of that, law enforcement and other authorities are often inactive or dismissive, leaving the women isolated and forced to question themselves. These modern thrillers maintain their core gaslighting principle. A woman knows the truth, but society and those around her, and even her own mind, seem alleged against her, creating both suspense and psychological horror. So, looking across these stories from Gaslight to Rosemary's Baby, and now to The Girl on the Train and The Woman in the Window, we can start to see some clear common patterns and recurring trails. These are not random coincidences. They are narrative choices that constantly define this genre of psychological thriller. First, the women are often placed in positions of vulnerability, whether because of social constraints, pregnancy, mental health struggles, or isolation. Second, the people closest to them, husbands, neighbors, or other authority figures, manipulate or dismiss their experiences, creating a pervasive sense of doubt. Third, the protagonist's own perceptions are called into question through a combination of societal skepticism, psychological fragility, and narrative ambiguity. Finally, external institutions that could offer help, like law enforcement or medical authorities, are often ineffective, inactive, or even complicit, leaving the women to navigate danger alone. Together, these elements form a recognizable blueprint for the gaslighting thriller. But still, there is one significant detail in The Girl on the Train and Woman in the Window that sets them apart from previous examples. In both, the female protagonists act as observers, watching events unfold through windows. This clearly echoes the classic motif from Hitchcock's Rear Window from 1954, where the immobile protagonist watches his neighbors from a confined perspective. In these modern thrillers, the window becomes a symbol of limited perception and isolation, emphasizing the character's separation from those around them. This act of observing also resonates with Laura Mulvey's theory of the male gaze, outlined in her essay Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema. Mulvey argues that in traditional cinema, women are often depicted as objects to be looked at, rather than as active subjects, noting, "In their traditional exhibitionist role, women are simultaneously looked at and displayed, with their appearance coded for strong visual and erotic impact, so that they can be said to connote to be lookedness." In the case of The Girl on the Train and The Woman in the Window, the dynamic is somewhat subverted. The women are not merely on display. They are seeing, noticing, and interpreting events, but their observations are dismissed or ignored by others. They are active participants in the narrative gaze, yet their perceptions are invalidated, reinforcing the gaslighting trope while also playing with Mulvey's ideas. The women see but are not seen, and what they witness is systematically doubted. In addition, both films feature protagonists who witness harm against other women. Their attention to these events, abuse, disappearance, or even murder, adds another layer to the narrative. They are not only questioning their own reality, but are also bearing witness to violence that society often ignores. In this sense, their experiences parallel real-world dynamics of how women's reports of violence are often dismissed or minimized. By speaking up and pursuing the truth, these characters confront both the immediate danger and the broader societal tendency to invalidate women's voices, adding a critical subtext to the gaslighting trope. But can this gaslighting trope be subverted or flipped? Enter The Invisible Man from 2020, a modern thriller that takes the familiar pattern, a woman whose perceptions are doubted, and turns it into a story of empowerment. Cecilia, the protagonist, is trapped in an abusive relationship with a wealthy and controlling scientist. After his apparent suicide, she experiences stalking and harassment that nobody else can see. For a time, everyone doubts her, authorities, friends, and even herself, echoing the classic gaslighting structure.
Someone is doing this to me. He's doing this to me.
Who's... Adrian? Adrian sent me the email. Okay. You need some medication. Adrian is dead.
It might be hard to corroborate with real-life statistics, but in popular culture at least, gaslighting is overwhelmingly something men do to women. In 2020 blockbuster horror The Invisible Man, meanwhile, was about a woman who escapes from her abusive partner only to be stalked by his invincible presence. If that sounds ridiculous, it does to her too at first, but it transpires that he is wearing an invisible bodysuit after faking his own death. Writes Alexandra Pollard in Gaslight how a harrowing Ingrid Bergman film inspired 2020's Word of the Year. The lead actress Elisabeth Moss told The Independent that the film was a gigantic analogy for gaslighting. The invisible man could be your ex-boyfriend, ex-friend, ex-boss, whatever it is that you feel like you are haunted by in any sort of abuse cycle. That was the story that we were trying to tell, while Trojan horsing it in this horror thing. But unlike traditional thrillers, Cecilia refuses to be silenced. She gathers evidence, learns the truth, and takes agency into her own hands, using intellect and courage to confront the invisible threat. So yeah, for me it was refreshing to see how the film retains the tension of psychological horror and isolation, but it shifts the narrative focus. The woman is no longer merely a victim whose mind is questioned. Instead, she becomes an active protagonist, who exposes the lies and takes control, demonstrating that modern cinema can evolve the gaslighting trope from helplessness to empowerment. I've also seen comments suggesting that Gone Girl plays with this trope as well. At first glance, Gone Girl feels like it might be just another story of a woman's disappearance, a potential murder, and the search for truth, the kind of narrative we've seen time and time again in thrillers. We expect to follow a female victim, perhaps isolated or doubted, as she navigates danger and tries to be heard. But right from the start, the film subverts these expectations. Amy Dunn is far from passive character. She manipulates perceptions, controls the narrative, and actively turns the tables on those around her, making both the characters in the film and the audience question what is real. While this is a great example of twisting the gaslighting trope, I have already discussed Gone Girl in our video about female manipulators, so if you're interested, please check that one out too. Another great example of subverting these tropes, but more in satirical tone, is the Netflix series The Woman in the House Across the Street from the Girl in the Window. This dark comedy deliberately mocks the cliches of gaslighting thrillers, the unreliable female narrator, the mysterious neighbor, and the constant suspense over what is real versus imagined. I also find it very interesting that Netflix had released The Woman in the Window in 2021 with Amy Adams just a year prior and then followed it with this satirical series. I think it's a clever meta-commentary. The platform first contributed to the proliferation of classic thriller tropes and then immediately produced a show that exposes and exaggerates the absurdity of those same cliches. In the series, the protagonist still sees suspicious events through her window, but the narrative plays them for laughs, exaggerating her obsessive speculation, her isolation, and the dramatic misunderstandings that are so common in this genre. The series turns the familiar tension of gaslighting thrillers into comedy, showing just how formulaic these stories can be, while still nodding to the very real anxieties these tropes originally explored. And now we finally arrive at The Woman in Cabin 10. I thought it would be interesting to end this video with a very recent example to see how a brand new film fits into the established pattern of stories about women being gaslight, and where it might even subvert or twist those familiar tropes. This way we can observe how the tradition we've traced from Gaslight and Rosemary's Baby all the way to modern thrillers continues to evolve in contemporary cinema. Keira Knightley plays Laura, or Lo, a journalist for a well-known publication, who has recently experienced a personal trauma. A woman she had interviewed is murdered because she dared to speak up. So Laura deals with grief and blames herself for not being able to save the woman. Laura receives an invitation to join a 3-day luxury yacht cruise with billionaires, including Richard and Anne Balmer, who run a cancer fight foundation as Anne is terminally ill. But one night while on the cruise, Lo hears screams and sees a woman's body fall into the water. Later it becomes clear that no one among the passengers or crew is missing, and the woman she saw in cabin 10 apparently does not exist.
There was never a guest staying in here, Miss Blacklock. This cabin was always empty. And the guest who was supposed to be in it cancelled 2 days ago.
At least that's what everyone insists on. From that point, Lo struggles to uncover the truth, while the people on the ship seems determined to keep her from investigating. By this point in the story, all the classic boxes are checked. A woman recovering from personal trauma, whose psychological state is called into question. A possible murder of another woman that she claims to have witnessed, but no one believes her, and an environment clearly set against her.
Laura, I'm sure what you experienced yesterday was very traumatic for you. But am I right in thinking that it was only a couple of months ago you witnessed a murder?
As the plot unfolds, Lo also encounters her former lover, Ben, who is photographing events on the yacht. While he becomes her main support, he doesn't fully trust her account, and later even unintentionally, which was so ridiculous for ex-journalist photographer, reveals her evidence to the wealthy passengers. Eventually, Lo discovers that Anne, the woman who was a wealthy heir and terminally ill, was indeed murdered, because she intended to leave her fortune to charity and not her husband. Her husband then brought in another woman posing as Anne to sign the necessary documents. The woman in cabin 10 also echoes the tropes seen in The Girl on the Train and The Woman in the Window. As Lo begins to doubt her own sanity, she starts piecing together small clues, tangible evidence that the murdered woman truly existed and is not just a figment of her imagination. But what in my opinion sets The Woman in Cabin 10 slightly apart from other examples is the solidarity between women at the end. Lo doesn't face everything alone. Eventually, the woman pretending to be Annie sides with her and is willing to reveal the truth. This is a notable departure from earlier stories, where female victims were simply murdered or disappeared, offering no support to the protagonists. That said, The Woman in Cabin 10 is still hard to call original or surprising. The film practically relies on all the tropes we've seen on the screen many times before, from the traumatized female protagonist to the mysterious murder and isolated doubting environment. Of course, in this video we haven't been able to cover every single example of women being gaslight in cinema. For instance, there's a film Before I Go to Sleep starring Nicole Kidman, where she wakes up each day unable to remember the events leading up to a traumatic incident. The film explores themes of domestic abuse, self-doubt, and a world that constantly questions her testimony, so basically it fits into this gaslighting tradition in many ways. In recent years, we've also seen examples in television where the source of gaslight against women comes from the other women. Series like Sharp Objects feature maternal or female figures manipulating their protagonists, adding new layers to the trope. I think this will be especially interesting to explore in our future video on motherhood in cinema, so again, if you're interested, please let me know. So in conclusion, I can say that cinema keeps showing us the same story. A woman sees the truth, but no one believes her. Ultimately, the evolution of this trope demonstrates both the limitations and the potential of cinematic storytelling. It's a reminder that while stories often repeat familiar patterns, there is always room to challenge expectations, explore agency, and highlight the resilience of women navigating worlds that refuse to see them clearly. In short, the story of Doubted Women is a story of suspense, fear, and power, but it can also be a story of courage, agency, and solidarity. And that is a narrative worth keeping an eye on as cinema continues to evolve. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please leave a like, subscribe, and write a comment. It's really important to me, and I always read your comments. I like to engage with you and talk on different topics and to know videos on which topics you would like to see. Such support will really mean a lot to me. And see you in next videos. Bye bye.